Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a case that, for almost 40 years, has really been defined by its impossibilities. We're talking about the 1986 murder of 16-year-old Chaim Weiss.
And to do that, we have to go to Long Beach, New York, to the Torah High School, which is an Orthodox Jewish yeshiva. I mean, this was a very insulated, very private world.
Exactly. And it was there, on November 1st, that Chaim was killed while he was sleeping in his dorm room on the third floor. And he was actually one of only 2 students who had a private room.
A huge privilege in that kind of environment.
Right. And our mission today is to go past all the sensational headlines and really do a deep dive into the sources, the police files, the press reports that came out later, witness statements, and try to figure out why this is still one of New York's most baffling unsolved mysteries.
And it's not a case of having no leads. Not at all. It's a case that's just full of these confounding, contradictory pieces of evidence.
And they all seem to point to someone on the inside, a killer who had this unbelievable mix of just pure rage and then somehow calculated control.
It's the classic closed circle mystery, you know?
Uh-huh.
But the level of violence makes that term closed circle feel terrifyingly claustrophobic.
Okay, let's unpack this. So we have a pretty narrow window of time for the murder. What do we know about the night of November 1st, 1986?
Well, Chaim was last seen alive by his study partner at around 1:20 in the morning. He was discovered at 6:08 a.m. So the murder took place sometime in that, 4.5-hour window.
And the scene itself, I mean, the brutality is just instantly shocking, especially when you think about the setting.
It really is. The investigators found evidence of just extreme targeted violence. Weiss had been struck twice in the head with a very heavy, sharp object. Police thought maybe a large knife or even a hatchet-like weapon.
And the force was incredible.
Oh, it was well beyond what was needed. It crushed his skull, and this is a key detail, it actually severed his spinal column. The lead detective at the time, he called it, and I quote, an extremely brutal murder. And he was right.
But here's the first huge contradiction. You have this incredible brutality, but it's set against complete silence and this surgical entry.
Right. This is a populated dorm on weekend night.
And there are no signs of forced entry, no students reported hearing a struggle, nothing was stolen, no sexual assault, nothing.
That dissonance, that's the key to this whole case. The nature of the attack points to like a very personal rage, but the execution of it, that points to intimate, cool-headed knowledge of the environment.
So police almost immediately thought it had to be an insider.
Immediately. The killer knew the building, they knew the routines, and they knew the victim well enough to get in, carry out this horrific attack, and then just slip out without a whisper.
And the details of the crime scene only make that conviction stronger,
Yeah.
especially when you start looking at what they did after the murder. This is where the profile of the killer just gets really, really strange.
Exactly. It's this methodical interaction with the body after death that is so fascinating. First, the weapon was never found.
So they brought it in and they took it out, purposefully.
Right. And then there's the body itself. It was moved. Weiss's body was taken from the bed and placed on the floor, still in his pajamas, but with his feet propped up sort of oddly on the bed.
So he was moved after he was killed.
Yes, and police analysis suggested he'd been dead and in the bed for several hours before the body was moved.
So the killer attacks and then what? They stay. Or they leave and come back hours later to interact with the body.
It's a chilling thought. And then you have the open window.
The open window mystery, yeah.
It's a third-floor room.
Uh-huh.
It's November 1st, so it's cold outside, about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And we know Chaim was sick. He was taking antibiotics for a sore throat. There is just zero chance he opened that window himself.
So why would the killer do all this? Move the body, prop up the feet, open a window in the cold. This is where the police theory gets really specific, and it really roots the killer firmly inside that community.
It does. Police started to theorize that these actions, they might suggest the murderer knew certain Jewish rituals related to death. The open window, for example. It could be seen as a custom to allow the deceased soul to depart the room.
So if that theory is right, it adds this whole other layer to the killer's profile. This isn't just a student or a teacher. This is someone with a degree of religious knowledge.
And they're either trying to perform a gesture of respect, or maybe it's a sign of ownership over the death. It's hard to say.
It's an unbelievable psychological conflict, isn't it? The rage it would take to sever a spine, followed by this calm, ritualistic moment.
But for all of the bizarre scene analysis, they did find one crucial piece of physical evidence, a single strand of hair.
A hair that didn't belong to Chaim, and they decided not to test it.
That decision really defined the whole initial investigation. This was 1986, remember? DNA testing was so primitive and it was often destructive, so the police made a gamble. They held on to the sample. They were afraid of destroying their only chance to get a match.
They were waiting for a suspect.
They were waiting for a concrete suspect so they could do a direct comparison. They were basically betting they could identify the killer before he could strike again.
Wow. That tells you just how convinced they were that this was an internal job. They were sure they could find this person through interviews and regular police work inside the yeshiva.
And the FBI profile they developed completely backed that up. The profiler said the killer was someone Weiss knew and was probably around his own age. It fit perfectly into that closed, intimate world. All the evidence pointed inward.
The physical evidence points inward, but the context for all this, that was brewing for a while before November 1st. Let's talk about the atmosphere inside the yeshiva and what was going on with Chaim right before he was killed. This is where the mystery really starts to focus on the administration.
It is. We know that in the months leading up to the murder, while Chaim was actually home for the summer, the principal of the high school called his parents' house. Not once, but twice. And he was specifically trying to set up a private meeting with Chaim.
That feels extremely irregular. A principal calling multiple times to set up a private off-campus meeting with a 16-year-old student over summer break. What was it about?
We just don't know, and that silence is deafening. Weiss went to the meeting. It took place in a home in Brooklyn, but afterward he absolutely refused to tell his parents what they talked about.
So whatever was going on, whatever the conflict was, it was between Chaim and the school administration, and he was determined to keep it private.
It certainly sets up a potential conflict that was only visible, inside the walls of that yeshiva. It suggests the rage might have been rooted in something institutional or intensely personal to the school's structure.
And investigators did their due diligence, right? They looked at outside threats.
Oh, yeah. They looked into a janitor, a local mentally ill man, even the idea of some kind of Halloween thrill seeker because of the date. All of them were ruled out. The school administrators also said they'd had no history of anti-Semitic issues, so the hate crime theory was out too.
So you have the murder, the ritualistic scene, the FBI profile pointing inward, and this weird unresolved tension with the principal. But the case doesn't just go cold. 8 years later, in 1994, it seems like the killer, or someone very close to the case, reaches out.
This is such a remarkable twist. The first thing that happened was an Easter card. It was sent directly to Chaim Weiss, the deceased, at his parents' house in Staten Island.
An Easter card.
An Easter card. And it had this sick black humor joke inside. It said, "Know what happens to chickens when they are too old to lay Easter eggs? They die."
Wow, that's a taunt.
Yep.
Nearly a decade later.
And right around that same time, his gravesite was vandalized.
Right, I remember reading about this.
Someone had defaced a stone slab at the grave with 3 Hebrew letters. Police figured out it was an attempt to spell the Hebrew word for murder or killing, which is retzach.
But they spelled it wrong. The word was misspelled. What does an error like that tell us?
Well, the intention was clearly to write reitzach, which is spelled resh, zod, chet. But the vandal used the wrong final letter, and this detail is so critical. If the police were right that the killer had this deep ritualistic knowledge, why would they make such a basic error in Hebrew years later?
It doesn't track. It suggests either they're not as fluent as the police thought,
or maybe they're trying to throw police off by pretending they lack that knowledge.
Just so unsettling. That mix of taunting behavior, the card, the grave. But with this one potentially crucial mistake, it feels like someone is confessing and mocking the investigation at the same time.
Then through all this, you can't forget his father, Anton Weiss. He was fighting constantly for justice. He was very vocal about his disappointment with how the Nassau County Police handled it all initially. He even asked for a special prosecutor, but that never happened.
But his pressure must have worked, because the case was eventually reopened.
It was. In May of 2013, Nassau County Police formally reopened the case, and they upped the reward to $25,000. Anton Weiss was at that press conference, and he pleaded with former students from the school, those insiders, to finally come forward with what they knew.
And after that, things started to trickle in. The community started talking.
Yes, especially after some media interviews in 2017, the whole picture of what that yeshiva was actually like started to change dramatically. We started getting crucial context about the environment before Ching died.
Tell us about those tips. They really paint a picture of an institution that was struggling with some very serious internal problems.
Absolutely. One former student came forward and alleged that he had been physically abused at the yeshiva a decade before the murder. Even more disturbing, reports surfaced of a suicide. A student had died by hanging in the yeshiva dorm showers several years before Chaim's murder.
So if you connect those dots, these later revelations about abuse, a known suicide inside the dorms, and you link that back to the FBI profile, what does that tell us about the world Chaim was in? Maybe related to that secret meeting with the principal.
It suggests the yeshiva was anything but the tranquil, contained place it looked like from the outside. It suggests a deeply troubled internal system, one where secrets were, fiercely guarded and conflicts were handled with extreme internal pressure.
So this history, it just reinforces that initial assessment. The mystery keeps pointing back inside that school.
It really does. It points to someone within that confined world, an individual who might have been driven by years of unspoken trauma or conflict. The brutality of the murder suggests some kind of breaking point, and that private meeting beforehand, that could very well have been the catalyst.
Okay, so let's just quickly summarize the contradictions that make this case so baffling.
Well, you have the immense physical violence, a hatchet attack that severed a spine right up against this methodical cleanup, and these ritualistic touches like the open window.
And you have zero traditional evidence of a break-in, which makes the outsider theory basically impossible.
And then critically, you have that unresolved tension between Weiss and the school administration right before he died. It suggests a deeply personal motive rooted in that closed world.
It's the ultimate psychological paradox. A frenzied, rage-filled killer who can just instantly switch to cold, calculated control.
That dual profile is exactly why this case is still open.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We know the original crime scene suggested the killer might have had some knowledge of Jewish death rituals, the open window being the prime example.
Right.
But then, years later, the perpetrator, or someone acting like them, vandalizes the grave trying to spell murder in Hebrew, but they make a critical error, a fluency error.
So what does that mean? Does that error suggest the initial ritual was a plant? A trap set by a killer who knew they didn't have the cultural fluency to keep up the act for years?
Or does it mean the person who vandalized the grave was someone else entirely? A follower, maybe. Or even someone who suspected the real killer and was trying to mock the police's original theory about a ritualistic insider.
Either way, all the conflicting evidence just ensures that the search for justice in this 1986 deep dive continues to focus squarely on the secrets held inside that small yeshiva community.
Something for you to mull over.